Hello there, Mr. K here, the mediocre painter, and I've been doing YouTube videos to get you into the wargaming hobby because I've made the mistakes so you don't have to. So today I'm going to be talking about Killteam again, but specifically I'm going to be talking about squats in Killteam. Now squats have not been part of the 40k universe for getting on, it's not far off 20 years now really. And there are a lot of old boys like me would really like to see them make a bit of a comeback. And something like a skirmish game like this is a perfect way, I think, to bring them back. I developed some squat rules for Shadow War Armageddon, and because that was based on an older rule set that was quite easy to do, just kind of inserted the rules from the companion, tarted them up a little bit and things like that. Gave them access to some nice guns, and it kind of worked actually quite well, and I was quite pleased with how that kind of turned out, and that gave me a bit of confidence to actually think, yeah, maybe I can do it for this too. So first things first, when you're thinking about doing something like this or introducing a race into the likes of an established game like Killteam, is models. You've got to think about models. Now, Games Workshop haven't made squat models since the early 90s. If you look on eBay, you can find them. They're not that marvellous, to be perfectly honest. They probably don't have the flexibility you're really looking for either. And also, because they're kind of vintage, they can be quite expensive. So what other options have we got? Well, they did some very nice Venators for Necromunda. I actually have some of those on my painting table. They're pretty cool. And I didn't pay outrageous sums for them, maybe £4 a model or something like that, and they're really, really nice models. They are kind of like high-end character models though, sort of like a dwarf noble sort of characters and things like that. And so maybe for your standard troops it doesn't kind of fit. So we're still looking is what I'm trying to say. There are a lot of people out there who do this, who substitute Caradron Overlords from Age of Sigmar, and they look cool, and yes, you could definitely see that slotting in if you painted them up right. I think Caradron Overlords are a really nice fit. Lots of them about, lots of choice. You've got some options for customization there because they are relatively new, and there is a fair number of them in the range that you can pinch bits from and stuff like that, so I think they're a really nice choice. Mantic also sell their Forge Fathers as well, and there's a fairly broad range of them there. They're okay in my experience. They're quite low quality, but they are cheap, so that's what you've got to take into consideration. They're not too brilliant, they're alright, they're not a bad choice, but my favourite choice is probably the Grim range of models from Hassle-Free Minis. They're a small outfit. I've talked about them before in Wales, and they make lovely pewter minis, and these Grim models have got a really nice character to them. They're not quite the same sort of character form as they are in Games Workshop, where they're kind of a bit more robust, shall we say. Originally, Games Workshop called squats Homo sapiens rotundus because they were round and portly. They don't have that kind of feel, and in some cases they actually don't have beards as well, so this might not play too well with you, but they are really nice minis, well worth checking them out. So what about characterization? What rules should we be looking at having our squats? Well, let's think about the lore a little bit about the squats, okay? The squat homeworlds have basically been wiped out by the Tyranids. They're now a spacefaring race, and supposedly they've been trading with the Tau, not so much with the Imperium anymore. So, obviously, hatred for Tyranids wouldn't be a bad trait to have, would it? And the original lore for squats as well, they hated the Orcs. So, okay, they hate the Orcs, and they hate Tyranids. That's fairly reasonable traits to have, I think. That definitely suits. The other thing as well in the lore for 40k, especially if you ever read any of the early 40k stuff, particularly by Ian Watson, the Inquisitor series, if you haven't, check it out, it's fantastic. the squat in that was an engineer, and he was very much like, this is how stuff works, whereas like the Inquisitor's like praying to the machine god to make sure things work and all this kind of stuff, and he's like, this is broken because this bit doesn't connect to that bit, not because you didn't pray. So they're very tech savvy, their stuff works, they know how to make it, and they've not forgotten how. So all that great technology that was around in first edition 40k, like, that they kind of pushed to the side, things like conversion beamers, D-cannons, perhaps they could make a comeback. That's definitely worth thinking on, isn't it? But I think maybe trying to keep it within the existing narrative that's here, if you go through the Imperial style forces, and I include even the Genestealer cults here because they've got mining kit, and of course squats are going to have mining kit, aren't they? Look through here and just pinch them all out, and then maybe it's just a case of, well, squats have access to this broad range of kit. So grav guns, yes. Melters, yes. Plasmas, yes. Web guns, yes. Seismic cannons, yes. Mining lasers, yes. They just have access to them. And I kind of like that idea. I think that's a good way of sort of looking at it as well. The other thing as well, them being kind of refugees almost, perhaps there's now an even greater tier system in the squat society. So perhaps this was kind of built around guilds originally, so maybe there's a set of people, your basic troopers, who are guildless. So maybe they're called guildless refugees, slightly lower stats, perhaps lower leadership, and less fancy weaponry, but they're like trying to prove themselves to become guilders. And then you have basically guilders, which are slightly better perhaps in terms of leadership only, but they got access to better kit, maybe something particularly squatty, maybe there needs to be something uniquely squatty. So when I'm thinking about this, well, what's uniquely squatty? So I kind of had a look online, and 1D4chan has some nice things around squats. They developed some nice rules, though I think they went a bit over the top. They sort of I've got sort of 3 types of sets of rules for coil weaponry, which is kind of like Tau railguns. Shot weaponry, because they're now ship to ship, so they'll prefer fancy shot weapons because they don't damage the ships. This one I actually really like. It's got a really nice theme to it. It also fits really well if you wanted to play Kyrundra and Overlords as well. And then they've got basically fusion weapons with flamers, so they have kind of like 2 profiles. I think they've gone a bit over the top with those weapons in terms of making them a bit overpowered. But I do like the idea of the shot weaponry, shot pistol, shot rifle, perhaps with the assault 3 and an additional +1 strength if it's half range, and also the maybe a heavy weapon of like a rotary shot cannon, for example, because that'll fit really nicely in with the Kyrundra and Overlords as well. So the shot weaponry I kind of like, the other stuff not so much, and the rules of 1D4chan I think maybe are a little bit overpowered for those. Because basically they're saying it's +1 strength at half range, but also if you successfully hit at half range it's 2 shots. To me that seems maybe a bit too overpowered, but I like the idea nonetheless. The idea is definitely a sound one, I think. Also generally, squat weaponry is often talked about as being better in some way. In this game, squats are probably going to be moving at 4 inches. If humans are 6, squats are probably going to be 4. That's a real hurt in this kind of game. So how do we kind of counteract that? Perhaps, their weaponry is standard Imperial stuff, but maybe it's just slightly better. But in what way would it be slightly better if you can't run too fast? Well, maybe it's got a longer range. Maybe that's kind of an interesting idea. So maybe they've got 1/3 extra range, so, or 1/4 extra range. I think kind of 1/4 is probably about right. So a 24-inch last gun is 30 inches, and a 12-inch pistol is 15 inches. I think that kind of plays out quite nicely, and it's also an easy rule to apply as well. You can just write that in their faction traits, saying, squat weaponry has an additional 1/3 range, or 20% range, so 25% I think is probably where it needs to be at. So that, I kind of like that idea, that's a good one. The other one that's kind of always talked about in squat lore and the companion and things like that was, squats don't have any trouble moving heavy stuff around or wearing heavy armor. So carapace armor doesn't give them any burden, and carrying heavy weapons, no problem. So maybe one of the things that we have is we perhaps have two sets of troops, maybe guildless refugees and guilders, and maybe the guilders can carry lots of heavy weapons, and maybe there's no penalty for shooting and moving with a heavy weapon with them. But as a forfeit for that, there's no heavy specialism allowed for squats, because that's just a standard trait that they have. That I kind of like. I kind of like that thematically. It kind of works, and it kind of means that the squats have a particular style to them, which is maybe they're loaded up with guys with heavy weapons. If you look at sort of the standard profile for squats back in the day, then basically it's a weapon skill of 4, whereas a stock human was weapon skill 3. Toughness of 4, whereas a stock human was 3, and they had a much better leadership than humans. There is at 9 rather than 7. Now things have come down quite a bit in this, so maybe maximum leadership they have is 8. Guilders have 8, maybe the standard guildless refugees maybe 7. Stick with the toughness, and let's stick with that weapon skill as well. Now the thing is, 40k is very much a shooty game, so having that additional weapon skill often it's not quite so good as you'd like. So how do we manage that? So one of the things that really strikes me about Killteam in general, which is not in Shadow War Armageddon, lack of knives. Models don't have a combat knife and a gun. And I'm like, maybe all squats carry a combat knife. That way, they're quite handy in close combat because they get that extra attack. And that's just a stock part of their model price. I kind of like that idea. That's a good one, because that means then they can make use of that extra weapon skill that they actually have, rather than just fighting with your fist, which seems to be what happens quite a bit actually in Killteam if you haven't given your guys a pistol or a close combat weapon. So I kind of like that idea as well. I also kind of like the idea of maybe a squat chainsword being better than a standard chainsword. Maybe it's actually got -1 armor piercing, for example, which is the way I think it should be anyway, but yes. So anyway, those sorts of ideas are what I'm thinking on. So this is, like I say, this is going to be like a part 1 where I'm sort of like setting the scene, because it's going to be quite a bit of mashing together of things in order to come up with something that might actually work. But those are the ideas that I'm thinking on. Hope you found that interesting. If you did, please like, subscribe. I will be doing a second part to this where I'll get into the details, actually lay out some stats, how I think it might work, points, costs, that kind of thing. And then I'll probably do a next part where I'll think on some stratagems and maybe some additional special rules and things like that. Hope you enjoyed that. Please like, please subscribe. I will be doing more. I'll catch you next time.